So I don't actually smoke this much most of the time. I got the cigarette as a thought of setting this up so that I have a time limit on how long I rant. So far, uh, every rant has overrun my cigarette, so we'll see. Um, this is my third canned rant, meaning one that I am pulling from a bullet-pointed script. It's notes about a rant that I did that the audio quality was garbage. And I'm hoping that the audio quality on this is going to be better. Not necessarily good. I'm literally using an iPhone in my car in the middle of the night, but better. So this can I'm opening is about a concept I like to call the one big exception. Last time I talked about verisimilitude, the one big exception is kind of a continuation of the concept of verisimilitude. What I mean by that is the one big exception is the big difference between your world that you are writing and the real world. The one big exception should be established as early as possible, because it's the place where you create a line in where suspension of disbelief needs to be maintained. You set up the story so that it lasts, or you set up the story so that it has a frame around it, kind of a box that your story, your new world is put into, so that the readers can go, okay, this is the difference. As long as this difference is maintained, everything else following should follow that exception, and also should be something that would be believable in the real world, assuming the exception is maintained. The best example I can think of for that one big exception being revealed early in a way that cannot be dismissed is from Jim Butcher's The Dresden Files. In the first book of The Dresden Files, Harry Dresden is sitting in his office waiting, and he hears the mailman coming up to the door, laughing, and then knocking. Dresden immediately knows this is going to be a bit of a headache, goes to the door, answers it, and the guy asks him, what is this? Is this real? Harry looks at the door, and the sign on the door says, Harry Dresden, Wizard. Yeah, that's me. So what, you do, like, stage performances, kids shows, that kind of thing? No, that's a magician. That's not what I do. So what, palm reading, potions, palm reading, astrology, that kind of thing? No. Well, then what are you? What's the sign say? Wizard. That's me. And, the guy leaves, and Dresden starts explaining, as a continuation of that yes, he is a wizard. The only difference between Dresden's world and the real world that we are in right now, assuming that Dresden is actually fiction and not, a secret history, God if only, is that wizards are real. Magic is real. There are a few other things that he kind of touches on and, implies that there are more secrets that will be revealed in time. But the one big exception is magic is real. So as long as you can keep the reader accepting that magic is real, their disbelief will not be suspended when you bring up magic. And this prevents you from losing your readers. Their suspension of disbelief doesn't break, and they stay on the hook. A good way of explaining this is if you have read any philosophy. There was a philosopher named Descartes who explained the world as something that we can't be entirely certain of. He says, we can only understand the world we see through our senses. But what if there's an evil demon controlling our senses, showing us all of these things? If it's locked us down and is pumping these perceptions into our heads, how do we know that what we are seeing and feeling and hearing and whatever is actually real and isn't just the control of the demon? And he ends the explanation saying something along the lines of, we can't be certain that the demon isn't controlling us. We can only be certain that we can only live within our senses. So you have to assume that you are in the real world, or that the demon is controlling you, or even if you believe that the demon is controlling you, you can only act and react based on what the demon is pointing you in the direction of. What the demon is allowing you to see. You, as the author, are that evil demon controlling the perception of the reader through your story. That kind of paints authors as monsters. I don't mind this attribution. Because part of what every author does is create problems for their characters with the eventual goal of allowing the characters to overcome them or be overcome by them. And that's what every story is. There are problems. And you have to figure them out for yourself. What else is there? So that's the basic concept of the one big exception, right? The world is the world plus one big exception. There are two caveats to the one big exception. The one big secret and the one big twist. And the two of them are kind of complementary concepts. I'm going to start with the big twist. The one big twist is part of the one big exception that's hidden from the reader. It's a twist that, while the exception needs to be brought up as early as possible in the story, the twist has to be brought up as late as possible in the story. It's possible for the one big twist to also be the one big exception, in which case you reveal the exception as late as possible alongside the twist. But that's really, really difficult to do. For the most part, the one big twist is like Chekhov's gun, or the pair of them are like Chekhov's gun. The exception is shown right at the beginning, and the twist has to be shown at the end. and it changes everything that happened before it. But in order for it to not feel like a cheat, you have to have been able to see that gun in the very beginning as the exception. The best example I have of that being done correctly is M. Night Shyamalan's The Sixth Sense, right? If you haven't seen it, it's like 20 years old or something. So, spoilers, no spoilers. The Sixth Sense, the main characters are, a detective looking in on a murder or something like that, if I remember right. I haven't actually seen it, but I've read a synopsis. And a little boy who can see ghosts. I see dead people is kind of a constant ongoing meme from this movie. And that's the one big exception, is there are ghosts wandering around. What you don't realize until just about the very end is that the detective following the boy around, having the boy help him solve a crime by talking to dead people, is himself a ghost. I don't feel bad about spoiling this for those of you who haven't watched it, partly because, as I said, I haven't watched it myself, partly because, as I said, it's like 20-odd years old. It's kind of like the Titanic at this point. If you didn't know that the boat sank, that's on you. So that's how the one big twist functions. It's a change of the exception that it was completely hidden from the audience until it is revealed. And it doesn't change the exception. It reinforces it. Done right, you can blow the minds of your audience. Done wrong or done too frequently, and your audience develops kind of fatigue from it, and that just makes things worse. Continuing with Shyamalan, because he kind of made a meme of himself with all of his movies after the Sixth Sense. Because that twist was such a success, he tried to bring in similar twists in, whatever other stories he wrote. Sometimes he'd have, multiple twists that just kind of tried to jerk you back and forth and, make the audience dizzy. They didn't work because basically they wound up with too much fatigue from twist after twist after twist. One big twist, properly executed, changes the entire story and makes it better. Too many twists, too many reversals, and it just makes your audience sick. Good example of that, again, it's Shyamalan because of his body of work. He did The Village. The one big exception is that you are in a commune in kind of a colonial era town. Small number of people living in town. There are monsters in the woods. You're not allowed to go out into the woods. You're not allowed to wear the color yellow or something like that. There's some color that must be avoided, and there's some color that must be worn to protect against the avoided color. And if you're not careful, if you're not good, the monsters will get you. Wah ha 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 ha. And then something goes wrong, and the main character, who's blind in the story, winds up having to go save, somebody is sick and she has to go out into the world to try and save, get medicines to save those whoever's injured or whatever. And in the process of this issue happening, you find out that the monsters aren't real. They're just the adults tricking the kids into believing that there are monsters in the woods to keep the kids in town and to keep them obedient. Okay, there's a big twist, there aren't actually monsters, so the exception was a lie. And then, she gets past the person pretending to be a monster and escapes and gets to the edge of the forest, outside of, the forest. And, oh, here's another big twist. They weren't in the past at all. They're actually in some commune that has tried to fake being in a colonial period to escape the evils of technology. And really, they're just living in the real world on, a reservation that they had enough wealth in the world to make it so that even flight paths over this location would be redirected so that no planes will ever fly over it to break the illusion that they are hundreds of years in the past. And it's like every twist is some sort of way of trying to break what the big exception was. But it just makes everything fall apart. It was not a good movie. Yeah. Sometimes people make mistakes. The Village is that mistake. So that's kind of a bit on the one big twist with the one big exception. Now, the third thing, the other caveat to the one big exception, is called the one big secret. Or I'm calling it the one big secret. Because I'm the one describing the concept, I get to name it. I'm sure there's an actual, professional name for it. But I forgot to try and look it up when I was translating, and I figure it works better like this anyway. So the one big secret is a one big twist for the characters, not the audience. The audience may know what that one big secret is, but the cast clearly does not. And that means that the one big secret is kind of linked to the concept of dramatic irony, where, the character says something like, what could possibly go wrong, while the audience has been shown what exactly is going to go wrong. Kind of a old traditional example of this that reinforces that the one big secret can be obvious to the audience while still winding up being a surprise to the audience when it is revealed to the cast, to the characters, is something from traditional Japanese stage performances. The plays are called no plays, N-O-H, and so to kind of give a bit of background on No is a stage performance where the actors, dress in elaborate costumes, wear fancy masks, and then perform. And all of the stagehands dress in, black, dark clothing to hide themselves, and they will change change things in the background and move things around while the performance is happening. and the audience is supposed to ignore them, right? You can see that there's someone carrying this fake bird across the stage, but all you're supposed to be seeing is the bird flying across for whatever reason the story has for having a bird fly across. Or they, move trees past as the actors, pretend to be traveling. Stuff like that. The stagehands are visible to the audience, but effectively invisible to them. They're something to be ignored because they don't really exist. And all of the characters in the play ignore the stagehands because they don't exist at all to the stagehands. So why is this linking up to the One Big Secret, where the audience sees something that the characters did not? Well, if you have a pulse and have seen any small amount of modern entertainment, you have heard of the ninja. And kind of the stereotypical image that we have of ninja as assassins comes from no plays, where the ninja would dress up as a stagehand, still hidden and but completely visible to the audience. You could see them moving around, but they look like a stagehand. And, as I said, you're supposed to ignore them. You can see that they're there, but they're not really there. So the cast is going about their acting, whatever they're doing, and suddenly a stagehand turns into a ninja, and some character is assassinated by a ninja, and then the stagehand or the ninja disappears back in amongst the stagehands and vanishes. The audience was able to see the ninja there the entire time, but they didn't notice that the ninja was there because all they thought they saw was a stagehand, someone invisible. The cast didn't even know that much, as the story goes, right? The characters in the story didn't even notice that much because to them, the stagehands aren't real at all, and the ninja literally just shows up out of the background and, performs their deed and then vanishes. There was that one big secret that there was an assassin on the stage with them in the scene, and the audience knew that that assassin was there, physically at least. They saw that it was there without knowing that it was going to be an assassin, effectively. That's that one big secret. Another example of a one big secret that is very obvious to all of the readers involved, but that is hidden from the audience, not the audience, but the characters within the story, is kind of the foundation of women's romance. In romance novels, of course, there are the two main characters who meet during the story and eventually fall in love with each other. Even if they hated each other from the get-go. Even, if they even if they were with other people in the beginning, it doesn't matter what the situation is. By the end of the story, these two characters are going to be a couple. That's the one big secret that the entire audience, everyone that's reading it knows, is going to be the truth, but the cast has no idea whatsoever. And, you know, it's established. Let's see. What else is there? Another example of like the one big twist. If you haven't read the Game of Thrones, not watched the whole Game of Thrones series, but read the first novel that the the television series was based off of. The first season of the television series was based off of the first novel, in the Song of Ice and Fire, by George R.R. Martin. And the first book in the Song of Ice and Fire was A Game of Thrones. And for whatever reason, they decided that A Game of Thrones was a better title for the television series than A Song of Ice and Fire, which is kind of disappointing, but whatever. Season 1, first book. The one big exception is that they're in this fantasy world that is very political, and the ecology of the world is significantly different, right? Winter comes as an enormous event, sometimes with decades between winters. But when they hit, they're hard and they last a long time. That's the one big exception. There is one big twist in the first Game of Thrones story. And it's pretty well shown. You know, the one big exception being that they're in this fantasy realm, and that kind of the world is inherently pessimistic. Bad things happen to everyone. And that's established really early on. And there are a handful of main characters in the story, but the primary character in the Game of Thrones is a character called Ned Stark, Eddard Stark, who is, you know, this war hero, a powerful duke in his own right, and is taken on by the king as his right-hand man, an investigator, at the beginning of the book. The one big twist at the end of the book comes when Ned Stark is executed. It's very rare for the main character of a story to be killed off. And it was something that kind of rocked the audience when it happened, because it was perfectly established. The build-up and the potential for it was all there, and we all saw, you know, everybody saw it coming, that he was going to be in trouble, and, you know, all of this, that, and the other thing. But he's the main character. Of course he's going to find a way out. Well, no, he winds up dying. And that becomes a bit of a twist, because it breaks from kind of the traditional, the way that stories traditionally go. You know, most fantasy stories, if you're the main character, you've got enough plot armor that you can survive anything. And this guy gets executed because he's outmaneuvered by characters that don't really matter otherwise, though they become more significant in later books. And, you know, plot armor is extremely thin in most of the Song of Ice and Fire, which is fantastic, because, you know, you wind up having things like that. But the one big twist, the one thing that really rocked that first book, was Ned's death. Because very, very few people excuse me, very few people saw it as a possibility. Ned Stark was the main character. Of course he's going to survive. Of course he's going to make it. He'll pull through. He'll figure something out at the very end. He'll be saved by some sort of, group who decides to free him. Something is going to pull him out of the fire. And then he's summarily executed. Another common bit about One Big Twist is it's kind of the foundation of mystery novels. A good mystery novel will have a twist at the end when they reveal who done it. If the novel is done correctly, for the most part, enough clues have been seeded throughout the story to make it so that the reader can have discovered, who committed the crime before it's actually revealed. It's the part of the entire appeal of the whodunit genre is that there is a twist at the end of the book, and if you're clever enough, you can figure it out before the characters do. There is an exception to that. I call it the Doyle exception or the Holmes exception. And it's something that is lost in the Sherlock Holmes movies and television series, but that was foundational in the Holmes novels. In Arthur Conan Doyle's Holmes novels, the one big exception is that Sherlock Holmes is smarter than everyone. He is brilliant, he is a pure genius, and he can figure anything out with the smallest, most minute clues. And the Holmes novels are written written by John Watson as the narrator. Watson is Holmes's assistant and roommate, and while Watson himself is a doctor of no small intellect, he is not Sherlock Holmes. So, especially in the early books, Watson is following Holmes around and, observing Holmes observing things, but is not able to determine what it is that Holmes is learning. So when the big reveal happens, it's a complete surprise. There are clues, and it's possible to figure things out, but many of the real solid non-hunch clues that the reader can pick up that are common in modern renditions of the mystery genre are missing in Doyle's work, in the Sherlock Holmes corpus. Because Watson, being a faulty narrator, doesn't know what it is that Holmes is looking at. He sees him, poring over the ground with a magnifying glass, looking at things, but he doesn't understand what it is that Holmes is seeing and doesn't know what it is that Holmes is noticing until Holmes explains it afterwards. This isn't the standard practice in mystery novels, because it is extremely difficult to do, and often readers will feel cheated by not having been given a chance to figure things out. You have to be a really, really, really good author to write a story that is engaging and powerful, and the twist of is something that might feel like it wasn't entirely established. You know, murder mysteries especially have Chekhov's gun in them. Chekhov's gun, I mentioned it earlier, I don't think I explained it. Chekhov's gun is this concept that if a gun is going to be fired in the third act of a play, you know, if a gun is going to be fired in the climax of a story, it has to be shown in the first act, in the very beginning of the story. And it has to be fed out. In mystery novels, the clues are required. The mystery reader wants to have enough clues seeded that they are able to figure out the story. And in the Holmes exception, those seeds don't exist, or they are so obscurely hidden that most or all readers won't be able to find them. Most of the time, if you set something up like that, the reader is going to feel cheated, and that'll pull them out of the story. Doyle, because he was a fantastic author, was able to get away with it. You and I probably are not going to be able to do that if you're writing a mystery novel. Seed your clues so that the twist at the end doesn't feel like a cheat. One last concept is the one big exception as the one big twist. Now this is complicated and difficult to pull off. And I kind of mentioned it early on as well. It is possible in some stories that you want to hide the one big exception to the world until the very end so that it is a twist. If you are doing that, you have to seed the story over and over and over again in a way that allows for the audience to guess the twist. Even as I mentioned with mystery novels. The difference between your average mystery novel and one where the exception is the twist is that most mystery novels still have the exception revealed early on. If you can pull off the exception as the twist, revealing it at the very end, if it's done correctly, everything that didn't make sense as the story was progressing will suddenly slam into place in a way that the reader can really be kind of have their mind blown. As a realization of what happened manifests. It's also really hard to pull off, and I can't think of any stories off the cuff that make the grade. I know that I've seen it done once or twice, but I cannot think of when, where, or how at the moment. I think I had an example, but I didn't make a note of it, so it doesn't exist. So what have I talked about in this rant? The one big exception, the one big secret, the one big twist. Again, remember that one big exception is the difference between the real world and the world that is being written. And the sooner it's revealed to the audience, the easier it will be for them to accept. The one big secret is something that the audience knows that the characters do not. It often reinforces the exception, but it changes everything for the characters once this secret is out. The one big twist is like the one big secret, except it's for the audience and not for the characters within the story. It's something that has been hidden from the viewer, the reader, the listener, in a way that makes it so that when it happens, it doesn't feel like a cheat, but it turns what the reader thought they knew on its ear. Not every story will have a big exception, or a big secret, or a big twist. Most fantasy or science fiction will have that big exception, even if they don't have the secret or the twist. And it's very difficult to have the secret or the twist if there is no big exception. But there is some fiction that lacks an exception because you're just in the real world, maybe at a different period of time. Although, if it's a different time period, that is a big exception. What stories did I talk about in this? Women's romance in general. Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. And The Sixth Sense and The Village by M. Night Shyamalan. Yeah. So not much really to suggest to viewers this rant. Game of Thrones is a phenomenal story. The Song of Ice and Fire, not so much, but the first book was amazing. Everything after that becomes a bit redundant, repetitive. Yeah. I think that's all I've got for this one. Bob out.